The phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m., and the message on the screen would end up rewriting the next 5 years of my life, though I had no way of knowing that as I stared at it in the dark. "I know it's late, but please, can you help me? My daughter has a fever of 104 and I don't have enough for the emergency room copay. I'm so scared. Please, Mark." I was not Mark. I had never been Mark. But something about the raw terror in those words made my thumb hover over the screen instead of simply deleting it and going back to sleep like any reasonable person would have done. Before I go further, if you believe that small acts of kindness can change lives, that strangers can become family, and that second chances are real, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Now, back to that night that changed everything. My name is Daniel Reyes, and at 34 years old, I was living what most people would call a comfortable but hollow life. I worked long hours as a claims adjuster at an insurance firm downtown, the kind of job that pays the bills but slowly empties something out of you that you don't notice is gone until you're staring at a stranger's desperate text message at midnight and realizing it's the most alive you've felt in months. My marriage had ended 18 months earlier, quietly and without drama, the way things end when two people simply stop reaching for each other. I had no children of my own, and some nights the silence in my apartment felt less like peace and more like a verdict. That text was clearly meant for someone else. The name Mark, the familiarity, the desperation of a person who believed help was one message away. I typed back carefully, explaining that she had the wrong number, bracing myself for an apology and silence. Instead, 3 dots appeared almost immediately, followed by a message that broke something open in my chest. "I'm so sorry to bother a stranger. I just don't know what else to do. My name is Sarah. My daughter Emily is 6. I'm sitting in the ER waiting room and they won't take us back until I pay something, and I have $11 in my account until Friday." I read it twice, then a third time, and I did something I had never done in my life. I asked for the name of the hospital. I want you to imagine that waiting room the way I found it 20 minutes later. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, vending machines humming in the corner, and a young woman hunched in a plastic chair with a little girl wrapped in a thin blanket against her chest, the child's cheeks flushed with fever, her small body trembling despite the blanket. Sarah looked up when I approached, and I watched fear flicker across her face, the reasonable fear of a woman who has learned that strangers approaching late at night rarely mean well. I introduced myself, explained the wrong number, and told her I just wanted to help if she'd let me. For a long moment she said nothing, just studied my face like she was trying to read whether I was safe, and something in her eyes told me she had been forced to make that calculation about people far too many times in her life. She let me pay the copay. That was all I intended to do that night, a simple transaction of kindness between strangers who would likely never speak again. But when Emily was called back, Sarah asked, almost embarrassed, if I would mind waiting, just so she wouldn't be entirely alone in that hallway. I stayed. 3 hours passed. I learned that Sarah was 28, that Emily's father had left before she was even born, that Sarah worked 2 jobs, mornings at a laundromat and evenings cleaning offices, and that the fragile scaffolding of her life had been held together by sheer will and the kind of exhaustion that lives permanently behind a person's eyes. Emily had a severe ear infection that had gone untreated for days because Sarah kept hoping it would resolve on its own, because a doctor's visit meant choosing between medicine and rent. I did not fall in love with Sarah that night, and this is not that kind of story, though it does become a love story of a different sort. What happened instead was smaller and larger at the same time. I found myself unable to walk away. Over the following weeks, I checked in, first through the same wrong number that had somehow become the right one, then through visits, bringing groceries, fixing a leaking faucet in the tiny apartment she shared with Emily, sitting on the floor helping a 6-year-old with kindergarten homework while her mother caught a rare hour of sleep on the couch. I told myself I was simply being a decent person, but the truth, which took me longer to admit, was that Sarah and Emily had begun filling a space inside me that I had convinced myself would stay empty forever. The struggle was not simple, and I want to be honest about that, because real stories rarely move in a straight line toward happiness. Sarah was proud, fiercely so, and there were nights she nearly stopped answering my messages entirely because accepting help felt to her like admitting she had failed as a mother. There was a particular evening, maybe 6 weeks into knowing her, when she broke down in her kitchen, gripping the counter so hard her knuckles went white, and told me she was terrified that no matter how hard she worked, she would never be enough, that Emily deserved a life with stability and a father figure and a home that didn't shake every time the refrigerator hummed too loud. I remember not knowing what to say, so instead I simply sat with her in that fear until it loosened its grip enough for her to breathe again. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone isn't a solution. It's your presence in the middle of their storm. Emily, for her part, had a way of looking at the world that reminded me what resilience actually looks like in its purest form. Despite everything, despite the fevers and the empty cupboards and the nights her mother thought she was asleep but wasn't, that little girl still believed in good things. She started calling me Uncle Danny within a month, entirely on her own, and the first time she said it, I had to walk into the bathroom of that small apartment and stand there for several minutes before I trusted my voice enough to come back out. Children have an uncanny ability to see straight through the walls adults spend years constructing, and Emily saw something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. Over the following year, things began to shift in ways none of us could have predicted that night in the emergency room. I helped Sarah enroll in a certification program for medical billing, something she had abandoned years earlier when life demanded she choose survival over ambition. I watched her study at that same kitchen table night after night, exhausted but determined, and I understood that I was witnessing something sacred, a person clawing her way back toward the life she had once dreamed for herself. When she passed her certification exam, she called me before she called anyone else, and I could hear Emily in the background screaming with joy loud enough to wake the neighbors. 6 months after that, she landed a stable position at a medical office, the kind of job with benefits and a schedule that meant she could tuck her daughter in every single night. Our relationship changed too, slowly, the way real and lasting things tend to change, without a single dramatic moment marking the shift but rather 1,000 small ones stacking quietly on top of each other. There was no lightning bolt realization, just an accumulation of Tuesday dinners and Saturday mornings at the park and quiet evenings where 3 people who had no business becoming a family somehow became exactly that. I proposed to Sarah 2 years after that wrong number text, not in some elaborate public spectacle, but in her kitchen, the same kitchen where I once watched her break down, the same kitchen where we now stood every evening making dinner together while Emily did homework at the table. Emily, who was 8 by then, was the one who handed me the ring, because she had been in on the plan for weeks and could barely contain herself. If this story has touched something in you, if it reminded you that a single moment of kindness can ripple outward in ways you cannot possibly predict, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that good things still happen to good people. Your support means more than you know, and it helps stories like this one find the people who need them most. We are married now, the 3 of us a family in every sense that matters, and Emily calls me Dad, though she still slips into Uncle Danny sometimes when she's teasing me, and I let her, because that name is where our story began and I never want to forget it. Sarah still keeps that first phone, the old one with the wrong number, tucked in a drawer in our bedroom, not because it works anymore but because she says some objects deserve to be kept simply for what they witnessed. I think about that night often, about how close I came to simply deleting a stranger's message and rolling back over to sleep, about how one small decision to type back instead of ignoring it rewrote the entire architecture of my life. I think about how Sarah, in her most desperate hour, reached out into the dark not knowing who would answer, and how I, in my own quiet desperation for a life with meaning, happened to be the one who did. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you have ever experienced a moment where a stranger's kindness changed the direction of your life, or if you've ever been the stranger who stepped in when it mattered most, please share that story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise you, someone out there needs to hear it today just as much as I once needed Sarah and Emily to walk into my life. Sometimes the wrong number is exactly the right one, and sometimes the family you were always meant to have is simply waiting for you to answer the call.